So good morning, Dr. Webb. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Special Education Academy. We're so happy to have you on. I think that you're one of the great professionals in the business, and we certainly appreciate all that you do for kiddos. So if we haven't met, I'm Mayer Cunningham, Special Education Advocate. I'm helping families navigate and negotiate the IEP 504 process. And so this morning we have on Dr. Webb, who is Assistant Superintendent, Student Support Services at Tomball ISD. He is the adjunct professor at special education for Sam Houston State University and a board member for TCASE. And so this time is yours. I wanted to have you on to share with families what we can do to collaborate even more and kind of tell us about the special education process and how it works in schools. First question, we're having so much going on, obviously, with the change of delivery of education with online education, in person, hybrid. Can you tell us right now what you think one of the biggest challenges in special education is?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. I think it's very important to have these type of venues and discussions. Special education is one, if not the most complicated areas of public education. So the education never stops for parents and for those of us that work in school districts to better understand the process, to refine the process, and to improve the process. One of the biggest barriers, or one of the biggest issues or challenges that we're seeing in special education, not over the past 12 months, they've been amplified over the past 12 months, but probably over the past 20 years, is moving special education from a system that's based on compliance to one that's based on the outcomes that the students with disabilities are achieving. No longer does it mean that you're doing good special education because you're in compliance. A student could have all of their IEP meetings held on time for their entire school career. We could never miss a deadline for a reevaluation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that student is well prepared to move to adulthood, whether that be a job or a career, or it doesn't make them any more independent. So compliance is the foundation of special education, and without it, we would not be able to protect the civil rights of students with disabilities. But school districts have to get better, Tomball included, on impacting the educational outcomes of those students. How well are they prepared to compete in a marketplace and be more independent than they would have been otherwise?
Perfect. So, one of the things that I always tell my clients is that they don't need to wait. And so, what advice would you have for parents kind of new to the special education process? And we'll do that question first, when they're new to the special education process. From my side, as an advocate that's served families for years, well-meaning families, I believe well-meaning school districts, parents are trying their best, educators are trying their best, and often for me, there is a very obvious delay. And I always tell families that I believe an educational intervention is as important as a medical intervention. If a student had diabetes, you wouldn't say, well, we're going to wait another year. So kind of what advice would you have for parents when they feel like there's an area of concern or they're new to the special education process?
Well, actually in our belief system in Tomball, it's on our front page of our website for our department, we feel that the wait to fail model is antiquated. And in the past, special education might have looked like that. You needed to fail in your current placement, whether that was in general education or otherwise, in order for the school district to respond. We feel now we want to fail to wait. We don't want to wait. So whether a child's having a deficit, exhibiting a deficit or a disability, it really is the function of my department. So my department is the student support department. We range everywhere from response to intervention, academic interventions, behavioral interventions, counseling and guidance, Section 504, and special education. So really what we say, it doesn't matter if you have a label or not. It's our responsibility to provide the support you need to be successful in the curriculum. Now, some students do move towards the eligibility side, and the evaluation does determine that they are entitled to special ed services. But we want to fail to wait. We don't want to wait to see a student fail. And I think it's even important for parents. So you do not have to be retained to be referred to special education. You do not have to be failing in your current school year to be referred to special education. You also do not have to fail the state test, the STAR test, to be referred to special education. You do have to have an educational need, but educational needs are quantified in many other different ways. I think my one piece of advice for parents new to the special education process, and I trust the process very much. I have a lot of confidence in the ARD process. I think that the IEP goals, that quantifiable metric to determine is your child responding to the special education services that they are entitled to and that the school district is providing, are those goals absolutely 100% measurable? I'm talking as measurable as heart rate, your temperature, your weight, or your blood pressure, because those are markers that help you determine if you're responding to health interventions. Special education is the same way. We want to make sure that those goals are in place and they are measurable and everybody understands what those goals mean. I think that sometimes we get in trouble on the school side when we write goals that are less than measurable, and then the students' parents are asking about are looking at the progress that's been made or not made, and it's so subjective that we don't know. And that the root of any disagreement between a parent and a school district always is progress being made and whether those goals are written in a measurable term, and if data is being collected at the frequency in which the ARD committee determined they should be collected.
Perfect. And so you talked about educational need, and I train, speak, and I love what I see on paperwork from the school that they don't qualify for special education because they didn't get sent to the office, which in the 70s I would have qualified. So while it's not humorous, I think often we're uneducated, whoever that is, in the application and hopefully what the intent was of IDEA. So from an outside perspective, there's many parts on that multidisciplinary team that does the evaluation, right? We have the evaluator, the administrator, general ed, special ed, service providers. Who kind of drives that train, and who sort of heads up that process, the implications and the determinations, if in fact there's a need for 504 or special education based on the evaluation?
That's a very good question. It's something that we teach continuously in professional development in the school district. Is there's no part of the special education process that should be unilateral, right? So it should never be one person's decision on whether a student meets the criteria for a eligibility condition. That should be the result of a multidisciplinary evaluation team. Now that might just include a diagnostician and the classroom teacher in some cases, or it might include the classroom teacher, diagnostician, speech pathologist, school psychologist, and others. But there really needs to be the first step, the determination of whether a student is suspected of having a disability should come from that referral team. In our district, that's called the our response to intervention teams. That should be a committee decision. The evaluation should be by a committee also, with not one person that is making the final decision. And then the placement decision and the ultimate determination of whether a child is eligible is not based on the evaluation. It's based on the data collected in the evaluation, but it's by that ARD committee. So there are times that the evaluation team says, yes, the student does meet the condition of having a disability, but then the ARD committee might say, well, maybe they're not eligible for special education, and that can take place. But I think it's important that this is a committee decision. And when we get to the first step and the last step, which is the referral and the ARD committee, parents' voice must be heard in those decisions, right? Whether the committee wants to refer a child to special education or not is irrelevant if the parent is not in agreement. Whether we want to propose an IEP or not, it's irrelevant if the parent's not in agreement. So the parent's voice is just as valuable as the data that's collected in the evaluation process. And it is so important that parents plug into the process. It's very important that parents stay plugged in the process, even when they might be frustrated with it.
Perfect. So what would be your recommendation? You know, I'm in this space because I had a child with a disability. And so what would you recommend to parents who are not happy with the special education process? You know, for me, I am not a referral to disagreements or filing of those sorts of things, but there is a dispute resolution process. But I also recommend to my families that we do it in an even way. We don't go from 1 to 100. So kind of if they're unhappy at Elm Elementary School, what would be your recommendation?
Well, in my experience, you know, and now in over 20 years of this, I think that most disagreements between the school district, not all of them, but most of them between parents come down to issues in the relationship between whoever's providing that IEP and the family, whether it be the teacher, the campus administrator, or the district administrator. And I think that a lot of disagreements are based on misperceptions both ways. You know, I would encourage parents to have consistent dialogue with their classroom teacher, with the classroom teacher of their child outside of ARD meetings. So, you know, participating in open houses, going to parent conferences. And because there's, you know, again, I trust the ARD committee process, but there's so much to public education that's not a part of the ARD process. And I think that many families of children with disabilities believe that that's my time, and it is, but it's also your time at open house. It's also your time at parent conference. It's also your time to volunteer at the school and help to build those relationships, so we don't have any disagreements that are based on misperceptions. I think that often happens. That happens on our side too.
Right. And so if a family gets to a point in an IEP meeting and they, you know, we disagree twice, what the LEA has proposed is then put in place. What would be your recommendation? And you have a great website. Much information is on your website, and we appreciate that. Do you just give them a copy of the procedural safeguards, or what happens in that process?
Well, we always have an attempt to at least try to mediate the dispute informally. You know, I'll meet with a number of parents outside of an ARD meeting to help try to, again, work on that relationship and maybe clarify some points that might have been miscommunicated in the IEP meeting. But we do that a lot. I will assign student support specialists from my department to those ARD meetings that are difficult, again, to try to help with the communication. But if we still can't reach an agreement, it is not adversarial for a parent to file for mediation or a resolution process. And that's part of the process too, right? It's not the process that's used as often, but you know, we don't define ourselves as doing bad special education when a parent has gone to mediation. You know, sometimes that's what the parent needs to do. And I tell parents a lot, I think 99, maybe not 99, about 9 out of 10 times, about 90% of the time, we're not in disagreement with the parent at all. The meeting has resulted in disagreement, but it's because we have parameters that we have to work within, right? So there are, you know, I give examples all the time with different graduation paths for students with disabilities. I mean, there's a limited number with them. I don't agree with all of them. I wish we had many more. I agree with the ones that we have. I wish we had 25 or 30. We don't have that many. We have 4 or 5. And sometimes kids don't meet in that specific graduation path, and there's disagreement. It's not that we don't agree, it's that we don't have other parameters to pursue. You know, we had a family move in the other day and bought a home in a very nice neighborhood, and you know, they worked for that home and did their research, and they got in that home, and their child has a disability, and the school that they thought that their child was going to, we simply don't have the services to meet those child's needs, and we're having to move that child. That ARD is entered in disagreement. I'm not in disagreement with the parent at all. If we were able to provide services at that child's school, we would. And that's a disagreement more on the technical side, but I think many times the functional, we are right there with the parents, but there are parameters that the school district has to work within.
So what do you say to parents who, I try to help my parents to move from the why to what next, because sometimes when you get stuck, when you're in disagreement on the why, it doesn't kind of, what I say, move the cheese. But for what's next, what would you recommend parents do as being better committee members? And I just think this probably is a function of this setup, right? We go to the school for the meeting, the student is taught at the school, and often parents feel like, I don't think purposely, but they're on the outside, right? They're not teaching the student, they didn't go to school for that. So what would you share with the parents as being, a robust member of the IEP process, and a full participating stakeholder?
I think one question that every parent should ask at an ARD meeting to help keep that ARD accountable. It doesn't matter if this is for a child that's 3 years old or 10 years old or 18 years old. What are the implications of these decisions that we are making today? What are the implications that these decisions are going to make on graduation and my child's opportunity after graduation? A lot of times the school and the parents will get very focused in how can we just make it through the school year and how can we make it through next year, perhaps.
Right.
And there are decisions that the ARD committee makes that could make it difficult for a student to earn an industry certification by the time that they graduate. In schools now, kids can graduate with certifications for pharmacy technician, veterinary technician. They can earn certifications in welding, in which they can leave high school and go into well-paying jobs. But sometimes ARD committee decisions based on the restrictiveness of the setting or the type of track the student is going down could prevent that student from getting an industry certification. Other decisions could impact the student from entering into the military. Other decisions could impact the student from going to Sam Houston State or University of Houston if that's the parents' wish, and if they think that's where they're going. Sometimes they get to high school and say, oh, that's not even a possibility, or at least not an immediate possibility. And I think that sometimes say, well, how do we get to this spot that they're not going to be eligible to become a welder? Well, those decisions we made in 4th and 5th grade, 6th grade, did not put the student in a position where they were able to access those level classes as a freshman in high school. Right. And at that point, it's really hard to go back and change.
Right. And so I tell parents, whether their child's 3, transition starts today, right? I think a lot of us as parents and advocates and educators do so much heavy lifting in elementary school that we're kind of unprepared when junior high and high school, and we're just coasting. And I kind of see it just the opposite. So what does your district do as far as, that 16 is the federal standard, but in Texas we do transition at 14. What does your district do to set up kids for success, sort of as you were talking about for that?
So whereas kids are approaching the age of 14, we are conducting interest surveys on different types of jobs that a student may have interest in, and then we're trying to align their IEP goals to those jobs. But it's very important because I tell parents all the time, it's not like it was when you and I were in school. It's very different. It looks more like college. So course selection beginning in the 8th grade is critical. What courses are you taking could be in 8th grade, 9th grade, up to 12th grade. That course sequence that will help you get to whatever that goal is. And there's a number of different terms right now. So career and technology education, CTE is really where we're working for a lot of kids, but we have, you want to be a completer or do you want to be a concentrator? Well, what does that mean? Well, a completer is you're taking 4 courses for 5 credits and you are becoming certified in welding or something like that. Or if you are a concentrator, what does that mean? That means you're not quite there. You've completed 3 credits and 3 classes and 4 credits. And then maybe you can get that little bit of extra at Lone Star or a community college. but it's complicated. And then you lay on top the endorsements, where we can go a STEM, or we can go through business or education. And there's just many different avenues. I think it's important for the parent to understand those are paths for students with disabilities too. There is a path to graduation for every child with a disability. That path just may not be the same path that you took or I took. And it may not even be the same path that a lot of students within that cohort take. But there is a path, and then we have to find it and carve it out for that student.
Perfect. And I agree. I have so many parents, and I was one of those parents, and I was raised that way, that you're going to go to a 4-year college. And, one of the questions I do ask a committee is why? If somebody doesn't, we don't need to all be engineers, we don't need to all be whatever, that 4-year college degree is going to get them what, right? And what's the probability that they can do that job? So that's really good information. Again, thank you for so much time you've given me. We just have one more question. How does Tomball ISD address discipline for students with disabilities?
So Tomball ISD is a fast growth district, one of the fastest growing in the state. But we've seen significant dips in our use of out-of-school suspension and in-school suspension. We're talking 30 to 40% over the last 2 years. We also see no more disproportionality in the use of exclusionary discipline for students with disabilities. And in part, I think that that's due to our availability of wraparound services. We have a mental health, behavioral health continuum. For example, if a student is challenged with alcohol or drugs, rather than immediately suspending the student or referring the student to DAP, what we do is we connect them with a licensed counselor in that area, where we can do an alcohol and drug assessment within 24 hours to determine their level of addiction. If the student is challenged with alcohol and drugs, the school district will pay for up to 6 weeks of intervention for that student. So we're trying to get to the root of the problem and not using suspension to try to solve a problem that I just described, that a student may have with alcohol or drugs. We have multiple models now of telecounseling that are short-term, that maybe could be provided for 4 to 6 weeks to help students better understand feelings that they are dealing with, whether it could be a divorce in the family, it could be anxiety or depression, or a move, or just coming through what we've just come through the last 12 months. And students are acting out, but we're trying to get to the root of the problem and provide them with their additional supports and services rather than using suspension. We have a number of partnerships. We have a partnership with MD Anderson, and where we work with them on tools and curriculum to teach kids the adverse effects of vaping. And as a result, when kids are found vaping or they're suspected of vaping, we work with them through this curriculum to teach them about what's going on with their body when they choose to vape, rather than trying to control that behavior with suspensions only. Same thing is true with social emotional learning type of online modules. We have a partnership with EverFi, short for Ever Financial, provides us a catalog of different types of skill building modules that we help kids and families engage in as a way of avoiding suspension. And again, that's in place for all kids, but we did it because students with disabilities were bearing the burden of exclusionary discipline at a rate much higher than kids without disabilities.
So good, thank you. I'm just asking you one more. I always have one more question. So I have a family that has a child in special education, has a child in 504, and then has another child that has presented with really intense emotional dysregulation, sort of all of a sudden, right? You and I have talked about this. We see this now with the closure of schools. So for that parent, they've handled everything outside and are providing services to that student. But it kind of, as I hear you talk, what would be if your child wasn't in special education or wasn't in 504, but did had some emotional dysregulation challenges? Is there something available for them in the school district, and how would they begin that?
Yeah, so every school counselor is very well aware of our continuum of behavioral health supports. I think that's where to start on referrals to these type of programs. Tomball although we're, a suburb of Houston and not far from downtown, we actually, we are what I like to call in a mental health desert. So even though we're 25 miles from the best medical center in the world, that 25 miles looks about like a 3-hour round trip, especially in the morning or afternoon. So the likelihood that many of our families, especially the families without resources, are able to make those long drives to and from some of the more low cost or no cost mental health community agencies is just not likely. So we call Harris County and say, hey, we're in mental health desert out here. A lot of your services are located inside the city and nothing really on the outskirts of the county. So they did agree and say, yes, you are. So they did agree, and they have fully staffed a co-location. So a co-location is a mental health clinic that's 100% funded by the Harris Center, which is the mental health authority of the county. And this clinic is located at Tomball High School. So the intake process is at Tomball High School, but kids can be served at any school in Tomball. So the Harris Center, I believe, is located on 59 in Chimney Rock. That's their main location. And we had a lot of referrals there, and parents would go once and would never go back, especially if you had a weekly visit. But now you can get those same services in Tomball. And that all starts with the school counselor.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate a true partnership with families. It makes all the difference. And thank you for all the information. I steal lots of your sayings that you have on your website, which is available to anybody. And we hope to continue this conversation. And so, again, families, we are focused on one thing. We all want the same thing, just one table, one side of the table, and we all want successful student outcomes. So thank you for watching the show, and we'll see you guys on the next video.